Ladies and gentlemen, every great story ever told has two sides, the one the world sees, and the one the world never truly understands. What fascinates me most about human behavior, especially when observed through the lens of extraordinary individuals, is that the visible story, the one told through headlines, public appearances, or bold decisions, is rarely the full narrative. There exists a quiet, intricate, almost invisible architecture behind every great mind, a secret side that fuels their genius, their resilience, their obsessions, and their heartbreaks. It's the side that doesn't trend on social media, doesn't get written in history books, but silently shapes everything the world eventually comes to admire or judge. When we talk about innovation, transformation, or audacious human pursuits, it's easy to focus on achievements, the rockets, the companies, the revolutions. But what most people miss is the hidden network of thought patterns, emotional calibrations, and neurological architectures that make such pursuits possible in the first place. I've spent years studying how extraordinary minds function, not as myth, but as complex human systems. And the truth is this: the people who redefine industries and reshape how humanity lives often carry a world inside them that is far more intricate than the world they build outside. Imagine, for a moment, standing at the center of a storm you created, not because you wanted chaos, but because you dared to move against the inertia of the world. Visionaries do not live in harmony with the familiar. They live at the edge of discomfort, constantly pushing against invisible walls. But to do that, the mind must evolve differently. It must process failure not as defeat, but as data. It must see doubt not as fear, but as an algorithm for progress. And it must find emotional equilibrium in spaces where most people would collapse. I've observed how certain individuals have an unusual relationship with time. Not time on a clock, but cognitive time, the way the mind sequences possibilities. Most people think linearly: today, tomorrow, next year. Extraordinary minds think in multi-dimensional layers: now, later, then, and someday, all at once. It's like holding an entire future in your head and engineering it backward into reality. That ability doesn't come from ambition alone. It comes from a unique interplay between neurological plasticity, deep emotional resilience, and a kind of obsessive introspection most people will never understand. Let me share something striking from my research on cognitive and emotional adaptation among extreme innovators. When we measure brain activity during high-stress decision making, what we often see is counterintuitive. In most people, regions of the brain associated with fear and uncertainty light up intensely under pressure. But in a rare subset of individuals, the opposite happens. Their fear centers quiet down, while regions tied to analytical reasoning and long-term pattern recognition become hyperactive. It's as if their brain has been conditioned not to panic, but to design. This is not accidental. It's the result of years of rewiring, often through both voluntary focus and involuntary trauma. And trauma is a word many people forget to associate with success. Yet, in the hidden corridors of human greatness, trauma is often the unspoken architect. Greatness is not born in comfort. It's sculpted in moments of loneliness, rejection, failure, and unimaginable internal storms. But here's the paradox. Instead of allowing those storms to destroy them, extraordinary individuals learn to use that turbulence as raw energy. They don't avoid pain, they metabolize it. Neurologically, this translates into stronger neural pathways associated with adaptive behavior, heightened stress tolerance, and a capacity for nonlinear problem solving. I recall working closely with neuroscientific studies involving individuals who consistently operate at mental extremes: pilots, deep space engineers, elite inventors, world-class innovators. There is a pattern that repeats itself: a high degree of internal solitude. Not loneliness, but solitude. Loneliness is when you crave connection and lack it. Solitude is when you build worlds within yourself that are so vast, most people can't walk into them. That solitude becomes their workshop. It's where ideas are built, deconstructed, rebuilt, and refined long before the world gets a glimpse of them. But solitude is also dangerous. It can turn brilliance into isolation, innovation into obsession, and confidence into distance from others. That's the secret side the world rarely sees. Behind every breathtaking launch, behind every billion-dollar innovation, behind every impossible dream turned real, there's often a human being wrestling with a relentless mind that doesn't know how to rest. Nights without sleep, thoughts that loop like a circuit that never powers down, emotional thresholds constantly stretched to their limits. People love to romanticize genius, but they rarely talk about the cost. The human nervous system was not designed to carry the weight of entire futures alone. And yet, some people do it. Not because they want to be heroes, but because their minds simply don't accept a world that stays the same. What's remarkable is how neuroscience aligns with this. In individuals with extreme creative and cognitive output, their dopamine regulation works differently. Dopamine isn't just the molecule of pleasure, it's the molecule of pursuit. In typical brains, dopamine spikes when a goal is achieved. In visionary minds, dopamine spikes when the goal is imagined. It's not the finish line that excites them. It's the chase, the building, the becoming. This is why they often appear restless, unsatisfied, or distant even after monumental success. They're not wired to celebrate, they're wired to keep constructing. This creates a fascinating duality, a person admired for their ability to change the world, and yet often unable to feel the same sense of arrival that the world projects onto them. When the external applause meets an internal void, that's when many visionaries retreat further into their hidden world. They don't speak about it publicly, not because they're ashamed, but because it's hard to translate that level of mental velocity into language. I've interviewed individuals who've said things like, "When people celebrate me, I feel like they're celebrating a shadow, not because they doubt their achievements, but because the world is cheering for what it can see. The product, the innovation, the symbol, not the person who quietly built it at 3 a.m. in silence." And that silence can be deafening. Every great mind carries within it two battles, the one with the world and the one with itself. The first is visible, launching rockets, inventing cars, creating revolutions. The second is invisible, fighting doubt, sustaining clarity, surviving the weight of a relentless imagination. And often, it's the second battle that's the hardest to win. Science gives us some insight here. The brain regions associated with imagination, the default mode network, tend to be hyperactive in visionaries. This is the network that lights up when we daydream, plan, imagine, and wander mentally. In most people, it quiets down when focus begins. But in certain individuals, it remains active even in states of intense concentration. This means they are constantly running two programs, building the future and processing the present. It's like living with two consciousnesses, one anchored in now, the other in possibility. That kind of dual processing is both a gift and a burden. It allows for extraordinary foresight and creativity, but it also creates an internal pressure cooker. If the mind doesn't learn to regulate that duality, it can lead to burnout, emotional numbness, or deep existential fatigue. And yet, paradoxically, this same wiring is what allows them to do what seems impossible to the rest of the world. You see, when the world calls someone a genius, what it's often witnessing is not raw intelligence, but an unusual alliance between cognition, emotion, and endurance. Intelligence is plentiful. Endurance is rare. The secret side of extraordinary people is not just their ideas, it's their capacity to keep standing when every neural and emotional circuit in their body is screaming to shut down. One of the most misunderstood things about people who push humanity forward is how detached they can sometimes appear. It's not arrogance. It's often neurological necessity. When the mind is operating on an extraordinary scale, it starts to optimize its emotional bandwidth. Small talk, surface level interactions, casual entertainment, they all start to fade into the background, not because they're meaningless, but because the cognitive energy required to hold up the weight of their vision leaves very little left for anything else. This is why many of them are described as intense, obsessive, distant, hard to read. In reality, they're often just living in a space between worlds. the tangible one that everyone else inhabits, and the imagined one they're building brick by invisible brick. It's a lonely space, but also a sacred one. And yet, what truly fascinates me is not just how these minds build machines, but how they build meaning. When you peel away the layers of ambition, technological marvels, and wealth, what you often find buried deep underneath is something very human: a desire to matter. A hunger to ensure that their existence leaves a dent in the timeline of humanity. That desire is not unique to them. It exists in all of us. But in their case, it's amplified to a level where it becomes their operating system. There's a pattern that shows up across history. From inventors who reshaped industries to explorers who charted unknown worlds, to modern visionaries who build what seems impossible, there's always this secret engine underneath. A blend of quiet pain, relentless questioning, radical solitude, and a brain that refuses to shut down even when the body begs it to. This is where neuroscience meets the human story in its rawest form. We can map brain regions, analyze neurotransmitters, quantify cognitive load, but what we cannot fully measure is the emotional gravity that pulls these individuals into their own orbit. This is the invisible architecture of extraordinary lives. But here's the most important part. This hidden side is not reserved for a few chosen minds. It exists in quieter forms in almost everyone. We all carry hidden architectures, dreams we don't speak of, fears we pretend not to feel, resilience that only reveals itself in silence. What separates extraordinary individuals is not that they have a hidden side, it's that they dare to live from it. They listen to it. They build from it. Every single leap in human history was once a whisper in someone's hidden world. The courage to trust that whisper, to turn it into a blueprint, then into a structure, then into something the world can touch, is what creates revolutions. And maybe the most profound truth of all is this: the secret side of greatness is not about being different from others. It's about listening more deeply to the parts of yourself that most people ignore. That is the side of the story the world never sees. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, when you truly peer behind the curtain of extraordinary lives, what emerges is not a mythical being, but a human being who learned to navigate internal chaos with surgical precision. It's easy to see innovation and label it genius, but genius, in reality, is often just obsessive clarity born from years of staring into uncertainty and refusing to look away. There's something deeply revealing about the way visionaries process failure. For most, failure feels like a wall, hard, cold, and final. But for individuals who operate on this rare cognitive frequency, failure is not a wall, it's a mirror. It reflects their blind spots, their assumptions, their strategies. They don't personalize failure, they dissect it. Neurologically, this is tied to an increased activation of the anterior cingulate cortex, an area involved in error detection and adaptive learning. While most people experience emotional distress during failure, extraordinary minds experience analytical acceleration. Their brains are not asking, "Why me?" but "What's next?" This adaptability is not simply intellectual, it's emotional. Because failure still hurts, the pain is not absent, it's integrated. They learn to walk with it like an old companion. And over time, this relationship with pain reshapes their neurological wiring. Rejection no longer paralyzes them, it recalibrates them. This is why some of the most world-shifting innovations are born not during triumph, but in the ashes of collapse. But that also means the people behind them carry scars no one ever sees. Scars of sleepless nights spent wrestling with uncertainty. Scars of ideas dismissed by those who couldn't see what they saw. Scars of loving something so much that they're willing to be misunderstood, mocked, even hated for. We talk about courage as though it's loud and bold. But the real courage that moves humanity forward is often quiet. It happens in solitude, in those invisible hours when doubt whispers louder than faith. When every rational part of the brain says, "Give up," but something deeper, older, and unshakable answers, "Not yet." That moment, that fragile, private rebellion, is where revolutions begin. And here's something that most people miss: extraordinary individuals don't wake up every day feeling unstoppable. In fact, many mornings begin with a silent war against exhaustion, against the weight of expectation, against the fear of what happens if they finally stop. But their difference lies in how they move through that war. They don't wait for motivation. They've trained their minds to act despite its absence. This is what cognitive scientists call prefrontal override, the ability of the rational brain to maintain action, even when emotional systems resist. It's not superhuman. It's disciplined humanity. It is also profoundly lonely. Not the kind of loneliness that comes from being unloved, but from being unmirrored. When your vision exists in a frequency most people can't hear, connection becomes complicated. Friends may admire you, society may celebrate you, but very few can truly stand inside your head and understand its storms. That's the silent cost of standing at the frontier. The further ahead you see, the fewer people can stand beside you. I've had conversations with people who've said, "Sometimes I wish I could just turn my mind off." Not because they dislike their gift, but because the very thing that builds empires can also quietly erode the soul. The same neural hyperactivity that fuels extraordinary creation can make inner stillness almost impossible. There's a neurological term for this: hyperfrontality. It's when the executive functions of the brain never fully relax. Imagine a spotlight in your mind that never dims. It's brilliant, yes, but also blinding. And yet, amidst this storm, something remarkable happens. In the private, unseen world of these individuals, meaning is forged in places most would overlook. It's not in awards, nor in praise, nor even in the finished product. It's in the act of building itself. The process becomes the sanctuary. While the world celebrates the destination, they find home in the journey. This is also why many of them live paradoxical lives capable of creating vast movements, yet personally yearning for simplicity. They can imagine interplanetary futures, but are sometimes undone by the smallest human disappointments. They can lift the weight of nations, yet still ache for a single moment of quiet connection. The human inside the icon never disappears. It simply hides behind layers of necessity. From a neuroscientific lens, this paradox has a clear foundation. Emotional regulation and visionary cognition often draw on overlapping neural resources. When one is overdeveloped, like the visionary imagination, the other, emotional regulation, can become strained. That's why many innovators seem emotionally detached or erratic. It's not a flaw of character. It's a bandwidth issue. Their minds are running at such high cognitive RPMs that everyday emotional processing sometimes lags behind. And yet, what's breathtaking is their resilience. The human nervous system has limits, but they keep pushing, bending, and reshaping those limits, often without realizing it. Not through brute force, but through pattern recognition, through the relentless pursuit of clarity, through a willingness to feel pain without letting it dictate the path. I often think of the human brain like a telescope. Most people use it to observe the immediate, what's near, what's visible. But certain individuals have turned their telescopes toward the edge of possibility, tuning their lenses to see galaxies of ideas before anyone else can. And once they've seen those galaxies, they can never unsee them. They're compelled to build them. This compulsion is not a choice, it's a gravitational pull. It's why many visionaries seem unable to rest, unable to retire, unable to detach. When your mind lives on the frontier, ordinary life can feel unbearably small. And so, they keep walking into the unknown, not because they need more, but because they can't do otherwise. But what happens when the world they build grows faster than the soul inside them can process? That's the quiet tragedy of many great lives. Success arrives before emotional integration does. Public adoration amplifies personal isolation. And slowly, the very thing they built to change the world begins to build a cage around them. This is where emotional intelligence becomes not just a skill, but a lifeline. The greatest innovators eventually realize that building machines is easier than building peace inside their own minds. That launching rockets is simpler than learning to let go. That shaping the future is less complex than holding stillness in the present. The secret side of these individuals is not just their genius. It's their fragility. The world rarely sees it, because they've mastered the art of moving forward, even when everything inside them trembles. But fragility doesn't weaken greatness, it humanizes it. Behind every world-changing decision is a human pulse, a quiet breath, a moment of doubt that no camera ever captures. And here lies one of the most powerful lessons we can learn from their hidden world. You don't have to be extraordinary to have a secret architecture of strength inside you. Every single person in this room has neural pathways capable of adaptation, resilience, and creation. What makes some stand out is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to listen to their internal storm and keep building anyway. When you trace the biographies of those who've shaped the human story, you'll see this thread repeating across centuries. A mind that couldn't accept mediocrity, a soul that learned to walk alone, a nervous system that adapted to weight most people never have to carry. They didn't just build machines or movements. They built themselves, over and over again, quietly, in secret. And I want you to understand something vital. Greatness doesn't begin in a spotlight. It begins in shadows, in the whispers of late-night thoughts, in the questions no one else is asking, in the courage to be misunderstood for years before being celebrated for minutes. This hidden side, the one few ever witness, is where the real story lies. And it's not a story reserved for the elite. It's the story of anyone who dares to live at the edge of their own limits. We often underestimate just how elastic the human mind is. How much strength can be forged not by escaping discomfort, but by leaning into it. Neuroplasticity doesn't just shape innovators, it shapes anyone who's willing to engage deeply with their inner world. That quiet discipline, that relentless introspection, that courage to keep standing in uncertainty. Those are the real ingredients of transformation. And perhaps the greatest irony is this: while the world marvels at inventions, the most extraordinary invention of all is the human being who built them. Not the machine, not the system, the mind behind it, the heart inside it. So tonight, I want you to hold this thought with me. Behind every extraordinary achievement you admire, there is a human being who walks through darkness, not because they love the darkness, but because they know that's where light is born. And if that's true for them, it can be true for you. Ladies and gentlemen, what we often call brilliance is simply the long shadow cast by relentless persistence. The public sees the glow of that brilliance, but the real fire is forged in unseen furnaces. It happens in the hours when no one is watching, when the applause has faded, when doubt feels heavier than hope. The people who reshape the world are not fueled by external validation. They are pulled forward by an inner gravity, something that feels less like a choice and more like destiny. I've seen how this internal gravity works on the brain. In high-performing minds, the neural circuits associated with reward and motivation don't just activate with success, they stay active during uncertainty. That's crucial. While most people's energy declines when the outcome is unknown, visionaries experience a spike in mental engagement during ambiguity. It's as though their minds have been trained to find oxygen where others suffocate. This isn't natural. It's trained, layered over years of choosing discomfort over comfort, questions over answers, solitude over noise. And that solitude, oh, how misunderstood it is. To the outside world, it looks like detachment. But inside, it's where their deepest conversations happen. They speak with their fears, they debate with their doubts, they negotiate with the unknown. In neuroscience, we call this default mode activation, a heightened state of self-referential processing. But in human terms, it's a quiet forge where reality and imagination meet. And what emerges from that forge isn't just technology or art or strategy. What emerges is a worldview powerful enough to bend reality around it. But power, in this sense, is not loud. It's patient. It's quiet. It builds layer upon layer like sediment forming mountains. That's why many extraordinary individuals appear detached from the rhythms of everyday life. Their emotional compass isn't calibrated to immediate gratification. It's oriented toward distant horizons most can't yet see. This gap between their internal world and the external world creates both their greatness and their suffering. And suffering is a word we rarely use when describing success, but it belongs in the story, because behind those visionary breakthroughs is often a soul carrying the weight of impossible expectations. They feel a kind of pressure that doesn't end when the goal is reached. It simply mutates. The higher they climb, the heavier the air becomes. Pressure doesn't disappear at the summit. It becomes thinner, sharper, colder. That is why so many world-shaping figures often seem to live at a distance, not because they lack feeling, but because they are constantly translating between two worlds, the one they see in their minds and the one the rest of us live in. They're bilingual in possibility and reality, but living in translation is exhausting. Here's something I've learned through decades of studying high-functioning neural networks in exceptional individuals. Their success is rarely about raw intelligence. It's about their relationship with discomfort. While most people build their lives around minimizing discomfort, they build their lives around mastering it. And the brain adapts accordingly. Emotional thresholds expand. Neural pathways become more resilient. Patterns of perseverance replace impulses of retreat. They've made peace with the idea that growth doesn't feel good. It doesn't come with certainty. It's messy, unglamorous, often invisible. But they embrace it because they understand that discomfort is the price of shaping the future. And this is where the secret becomes universal. This hidden architecture doesn't belong only to innovators, inventors, or leaders. It belongs to anyone willing to walk through their own darkness without waiting for someone else to light the way. Every human mind is capable of extraordinary elasticity. You don't need a stage or a company or a laboratory to access it. You need courage, discipline, a willingness to keep showing up when the world goes quiet. The beauty of the human brain is its ability to evolve in response to the story we choose to live. When we choose safety, the brain builds walls. When we choose risk, it builds wings. When we choose to listen to the whispers of possibility, it sharpens its tools and adapts to new frontiers. This is not magic. This is biology. Neuroplasticity is the language through which our inner world shapes our outer reality. And so the question isn't whether some people are born different. The real question is, how willing are we to listen to the quiet parts of ourselves that are capable of difference? Every time someone stands alone with an impossible idea, a quiet revolution begins, not in the world, but in their mind. That's the secret side no camera can capture. It's the trembling moment when conviction outvotes fear, when vision drowns out the noise of doubt, when one human being chooses to build something no one else can yet see. The world often meets that moment with skepticism, even mockery. But history shows us something astonishing. Time always bends toward those who build from their inner world outward. That's how flight became real. That's how electricity became light. That's how impossible dreams became the architecture of modern life. And that's why understanding the hidden side of extraordinary lives matters. Not to idolize them, but to recognize the blueprint inside all of us. Because the line between ordinary and extraordinary is not a wall. It's a door, and it opens from the inside. If you've ever had a moment when your vision didn't make sense to anyone else, you've stood at that door. If you've ever felt a pull toward something bigger than your circumstances, you've touched that hidden side. If you've ever wrestled with your own doubts in silence and kept going anyway, you've already lived a piece of the story every great mind shares. The world may never see that part of you, but that doesn't make it less real. In fact, that's what makes it sacred. The most powerful transformations don't begin with applause. They begin with a whisper in the dark. So as I stand here looking into this sea of faces, I'm not just talking about visionaries out there. I'm talking about the untapped, unseen, powerful architectures in each of you. The world you want to build won't be handed to you. It will be built in quiet rooms, in sleepless nights, in moments when you doubt everything and keep going anyway. That's where your real story lives. And when the day comes that the world finally sees what you've built, they'll call it genius. They'll call it luck. They'll call it extraordinary, but you'll know it was none of those things. It was this. Your secret side. The one that whispered when no one else believed. The one that held steady when everything shook. The one that built a future long before anyone else could see it. That's the truth behind every towering achievement, every revolutionary breakthrough, every impossible dream turned real. It's not a spotlight. It's a quiet, stubborn, relentless flame inside a human being who simply refused to give up. And if there's one thing I hope you take away tonight, it's this: greatness isn't out there. It's in here, in your neural architecture, in your emotional resilience, in your unseen battles. The secret side isn't a secret at all. It's waiting for you to trust it. Thank you.